The year was 1887. The Arizona Territory did not care about the date, it only cared about the wind. The wind was the true authority, moving red dust across the high, dry land, burying the fresh pine survey stakes of the new railroad line. The stakes marched west, pointing a wooden finger straight past the cracked tooth of Silver Butte and toward the deep, sacred shadows of Canyon de Chelly. Winter held the high desert in a tight fist. The nights cracked with cold so sharp it felt loud. The days offered only dust and a pale, indifferent sun. In the center of this wind and dust sat the town, a raw collection of lumber, canvas, and tin stovepipes, all pretending to be permanent. The air smelled of juniper smoke, cold iron, and the sweat of horses. Kiyazi watched from the strip of shadow beside the assay office. He kept his hat low, his body angled away from the gathering. He was a man made of the landscape, quiet, weathered, and possessing a stillness that made the new men in town uneasy. He had worn the blue coat of a scout for the army, learning their language and their ways of structured violence. He had left it behind when he realized their version of order was just a different kind of chaos, a sickness of the spirit. His goal now was hozo. The word, in his dying language, meant balance, beauty, harmony. It was the walk of his ancestors. It was the health of the land and the family. It was everything this town was not. He had ridden in for salt, flour, and perhaps to barter for a decent steel bit for his bridle. But he found the auction. It was a misery market, held in the open square between the Red Dog Saloon and the new railroad depot. The auctioneer, a man with a stained brocade vest and a voice like gravel rattling in a tin cup, shouted for attention. A fine saddle, gent's genuine Texas leather, barely used by the unfortunate soul who no longer needs it. What am I bid for? I see $5 for this beauty. Do I hear 6? Key watched. He was separated. He listened to the wind, the crack of the gavel, and the nervous stamping of livestock. Across the square, a woman watched too. She did not belong. She was Eastern, clear as a cloudless day. Her clothes were dark wool, sensible for the cold, but cut with a precision missing in Silver Butte. She wore a flat-brimmed hat, pinned tight against the restless wind. Her name was Eliza Hart. She was not looking at the horses. She was looking at the auctioneer, and at the hard men flanking him, the ones with their hands resting too comfortably on their holsters. Her face, framed by dark hair pulled back severely, was pale with a controlled, simmering anger. In her gloved hand, she held a small notebook and a fountain pen. The pen was a sleek black thing, her weapon of choice. Eliza had come west not for gold or land, but for stories. Not the dime novel fantasies of heroes and savages, but the real stories, the ones buried under the railroad ties and hidden in the station house ledgers. She was hunting the Canyon Syndicate and the systemic rot it spread. She had come to write reports on human trafficking and the corruption that fed the railroad's insatiable appetite. The auctioneer spat tobacco juice into the red dust. All right, that clears the livestock and the hardware. Now we move to assets and indentures. Property is property, boys, and paper is the law. Kiyazi went rigid. The stillness around him sharpened, like a knife being drawn. Eliza Hart lifted her pen, her knuckles white. They did not bring people out in chains. This system was cleaner, colder. The auctioneer held up sheafs of paper, stamped with purple ink. First lot, he bellowed. The remaining debt of one Silas Croft, deceased, includes his tools, his wagon frame, and the remaining 4 years of his daughter's service contract. She is 14, healthy, and trained in laundry. The debt stands at $90. What am I bidding for? A murmur went through the crowd of miners, ranchers, and railroad men. This was Merrick Hale's business. Merrick Hale was the Canyon Syndicate. He was a man few had seen, a ghost who lived in a private rail car. But his shadow covered everything. He owned the new rail spur. He owned the mine that fed it. He owned the saloons where the miners drank. the cramped brothels where they spent their comfort, and the company store where they sank deeper into his ledgers. He owned the Pinkerton agents who acted as his private army and the local circuit judge who stamped his papers with a flourish. Key felt the ho tear. This was the deepest imbalance. The world turned upside down. He knew this trade. He had seen it in the army camps, the way men treated people like packages, like entries in a book. It was why he left. It was why he returned to the Hogan of his aunt. She was the one who kept the center steady. She sat at her loom, her strong, knowing hands weaving the patterns of their people, her fingers moving with a wisdom Key envied. She wove the storms. He loved the lightning pattern, a sharp, sudden zigzag of color, a warning of power and change. He had returned to her, but a piece of his family was missing. His younger brother, Nate Benally. Nate, lost in the confusion after the wars, swept up by the changing world. Key had searched for 3 hard years. Nate was just gone. His aunt still spoke of him. She told stories by the fire, the old stories of how the world was made. She spoke of the trickster, Coyote, and sometimes she would look at Key and tell the story of the wolf who wears a blue bracelet. Key's hand instinctively went to his own left wrist. It was bare. The turquoise bracelet his mother had worn, the one he had given to Nate for protection years ago, was gone with him. It was a simple circle of blue stones, mined from the sacred mountains, a piece of the sky captured in rock. It was the only symbol he had left of his lost brother. Across the square, Eliza Hart scribbled in her notebook. Her handwriting was sharp, precise, and angry. Syndicate, debt auction, child contract, hail. She knew this was the linchpin. She was here to write the truth for the Silver Butte Sentinel, or what was left of it. The small newspaper operated out of a dusty back room. Its editor, a brave, tired man who knew he was poking a rattlesnake with a short stick. She looked at the girl referenced in the paper. The girl was standing by the depot wall, clutching a bundle, guarded by one of Hale's men. She was trying not to cry. Eliza felt the familiar sickness rise in her chest. It was not just righteous anger, though there was plenty of that. It was the old, cold shame of her own family, back east, ruined by signatures on paper, by debts called in by powerful men in clean suits. She knew, better than most, how paper could be a shackle. The bidding was slow. "Come on, gents, $90 for 4 years of hard work. That is pennies on the dollar. She is a strong girl." Key Yazzie looked at the girl. He looked at the men bidding, their eyes hungry or indifferent. He looked at the woman in the dark wool coat, the one with the pen. She looked like she wanted to stab the auctioneer with it. This was the choice: to walk away, to buy his salt and flour and keep his own fragile balance, or to step into the center of the sickness. Eliza Hart finished her note. "Freedom is not given," she wrote. "It is taken back." Key Yazzie watched the girl flinch as a rough-looking man raised his bid to $60. He knew his aunt would say that Hozo was not found by hiding from the ugly. It was found by facing it, by making things right. The red dust swirled around the auction block, coating everyone and everything in the color of old blood. The sun was weak. The air was cold. And in Silver Butte, as the gavel hung in the air, the bidding continued. The gavel cracked, sharp as a rifle shot in the cold air. "Sold $70 for the girl. To the man in the buffalo coat," the auctioneer bellowed, pointing. The man who had bought the child's paper debt grunted and moved toward the depot wall. The girl, the one named as Croft's daughter, shrank back. She looked to be perhaps 14 years old. Eliza Hart took a step forward, then another. Her notebook was closed. Her pen was capped. This was beyond observation. "Stop," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring. The auctioneer paused, gavel raised. He squinted at her. "What is that, ma'am?" "You cannot do this," Eliza said, walking past the rows of onlookers. "You cannot sell a person. This is the Arizona Territory. not a pre-war slave market. It is illegal. A ripple of laughter, mostly uncomfortable, passed through the men. The auctioneer's professional smile tightened. "Ma'am, you are mistaken. We are selling paper, a legal indenture, signed and witnessed. This is a matter of contract law." "It is a forgery," Eliza countered, her voice rising with a cold, clear fury. "It is theft, and you are a party to it." "Now, you listen here," a new voice said. A man stepped out from the depot office, adjusting his string tie. He was the station manager, a man named Bannon, whose hands were clean but whose ledger was filthy with syndicate ink. "We do not appreciate Eastern agitation in Silver Butte. You have no standing here." "I am a reporter for the Sentinel," Eliza declared, standing her ground in the red dust. "And I am a citizen. That is my standing." Bannon's smile was thin and unpleasant. "A reporter, you say? Well, Miss Hart, speaking of paper and standing, we have a small matter of our own." He held up a document. It was crisp, new, and stamped with an official-looking seal. "It seems," Bannon said, his voice projecting for the crowd, "that a Mr. Silas Hart of Boston, Massachusetts, guaranteed your line of credit for passage and lodging upon your arrival. That debt remains unpaid." Eliza's blood went cold. "My father's name is not Silas. I have paid for my own passage. That is a lie." "The paper says otherwise." Bannon said smoothly, "It is a civil warrant, properly filed with the circuit magistrate this very morning. The debt is $200, a considerable sum. Until it is cleared, your assets, including your person, are attached." "That is absurd. It is fraudulent." "The law is the law," Bannon said. He nodded to two large men who had been leaning against a freight wagon. They were not Pinkertons, not officially, but they wore the same hard, empty look. They moved to flank her. "Seize her," Bannon ordered. "No!" Eliza cried, stepping back, but one man grabbed her left arm, the other her right. They were brutally strong, and they half dragged, half lifted her toward the auction block. The crowd parted, faced a mixture of shock, amusement, and practiced indifference. "You cannot!" Eliza shouted, struggling against their grip. "This is kidnapping." "It is enforcement of a debt, ma'am," the auctioneer called out, his good humor restored. "Looks like we have one more lot for the day." Ki Yazi had been watching from the shadows. He had seen the sickness spread. But this was different. This was a violation of a different order. He saw the woman, the one with the angry pen, her feet scrambling in the dust. He saw the coiled snake logo, embossed at the bottom of the paper Bannon was waving. He moved. He did not rush. He walked out of the shadow of the assay office, his worn boots making no sound. He stepped directly into the path of the two men, placing his body between them and the auction platform. "Let her go." His voice was quiet, deep. It carried no plea. It was a statement of fact. Bannon's face flushed with irritation. "Get out of the way. Indian, this is official business. A legal warrant." "That paper is a lie." Ki said in his measured, "Army taught English. The woman owes you nothing." "And what would you know about it?" one of the thugs sneered. He was a big man, with a face like cured leather. "Is she one of yours?" Ki ignored him. He looked at Bannon. "You are not selling this one." "She is attached. The judge signed it," Bannon yelled, his composure slipping. He tapped the paper. Ki Yazi took a slow breath. He turned his head slightly, scanning the crowd. He saw the miners who wanted a spectacle. He saw the ranchers who saw only property. He saw the few Dine and Paiute families at the far edge, watching, their faces flat with a familiar despair. He centered himself. Then he spoke, and it was not in English. His voice rose, clear and sharp in the cold air. Speaking the Dine language, he spoke of Coyote, the trickster who makes lies that look like truth. He spoke of the sickness that comes when men turn people into paper. when they sell the children of the earth. He called the paper a spider's web, and Bannon the spider. The English-speaking crowd grew restless. "What is he saying? Shut him up! Speak American!" The dine at the edge of the square straightened. They did not move, but their eyes fixed on Key. He had given their shame a voice. Key pointed, not at Eliza, who was watching him, her face pale with astonishment. He pointed to the side, near the water trough, where two small children, a Paiute boy and his sister, huddled together, waiting their turn, their small debt next on the block. He switched back to English, his voice like a hammer. "Their paper. How much?" Bannon was thrown off. "What?" "The Paiute children. Their debt is $30. "You want money for paper?" Key said. He reached into his vest, pulling the worn leather pouch. He untied the drawstring. Silver dollars, carefully saved, clinked. It was his salt, his flour, his steel bridle bit. It was almost everything he had brought. He counted out the coins. He did not hand them to Bannon. He threw them into the dust at the station manager's feet. $30. Key said, "Their paper is paid. They are free." The act was so unexpected it stunned the square into silence. Bannon and his thugs stared at the silver gleaming in the dirt. Even the auctioneer was speechless. In that heartbeat of silence, Key moved. He did not grab Eliza. He struck her. He slapped her hard on the arm. "Go, now!" It was a command, not a rescue. It shocked her back into motion. As she stumbled away from him, he turned to face the two thugs. The larger one, the one with the leather face, recovered first. He lunged, ignoring the money. "You are not going anywhere." He grabbed Key's shoulder, his fingers digging in like claws. Key reacted without thought. It was the old training, the scout's instinct. He did not try to pull away. He moved inside the man's hold, twisting, striking the man's wrist with the hard edge of his palm to break the grip. The man grunted, his hand flying open, and Key Yazzie froze. The world dissolved, the sound of the wind, the smell of the dust, the shouting of the crowd had all vanished. There, on the thick, dirty wrist of the thug, was a bracelet, a simple, heavy band of silver, set with 4 imperfect, sky-blue turquoise stones. It was his mother's bracelet. It was the bracelet he had tied to his brother's wrist 9 years ago, before Nate Benally rode south. Key stared at it. He saw the small, dark matrix in the leftmost stone, the one that looked like a bird. He saw the scratch on the silver where Nate had dropped it on the slick rock. It was Nate's bracelet. His mind screamed, "Where did you get this?" The thug, seeing Key's frozen expression, mistook it for fear. He sneered and drew back his other fist, a heavy, bruising punch aimed at Key's face. Key barely saw it coming. He deflected it, but the blow glanced off his cheekbone, sending a shock of pain through his skull. The impact broke the spell. He looked from the bracelet to the man's face. The man was a stranger, his eyes cruel and empty. Nate was here, or he had been. This man had the bracelet. Did he kill him for it, or was Nate one of them? "Key!" Eliza shouted. She had not run far. She had seen the punch. Key shoved the thug backward, hard. He did not stay to fight. He could not. The bracelet had changed everything. He grabbed Eliza's arm, the one he had struck, and pulled her bodily toward his horse, tied to the rail of the assay office. "What are you doing? We cannot run," Eliza protested, stumbling to keep up. "We have to fight this. That paper is a fraud." "The paper does not matter," Key said, his voice flat and dead. He was looking back, memorizing the face of the man wearing his brother's life. "It is the only thing that matters," she argued, pulling against his grip. "They are selling people. I am going to find the source. I am going to find Hale's ledgers. I will not let them—" "You will be dead by sunset," Key said. He reached his horse, a lean Mustang with a wary eye. He untied the reins with one violent tug. "My business here is over." "Over? You just bought those children. You cannot leave them." Key gestured with his chin. The two Paiute children, seeing their chance, were already gone, vanishing into the alley behind the smithy. "They are free. I cannot help you." He put his foot in the stirrup. "Wait." Eliza grabbed the leather of his vest. "Please. They are trafficking them. They are stealing children. They are taking them somewhere." A sound, a bare whisper, came from the shadows of the alley the Paiute children had taken. A young woman, wrapped in a faded red blanket, stepped out. She was dying, perhaps 16, her face thin with fear. She ignored Key, her eyes fixed on Eliza. She darted forward, pressing something small and beat it into Eliza's hand. "Shiyaji," the girl whispered, her voice trembling. "Miss, you write, please. You have the paper. If you do not write, they will erase our names." She glanced nervously toward the auction block. "They are taking us to Dry Fork, to the ghost depot." Before Eliza could answer, the girl turned and fled, disappearing like a spirit back into the deep shadows. Eliza opened her hand. She stared at the small, beaded token. "Dry Fork," she whispered. She looked at Key. "That is the depot, the end of the spur line. That must be where they are holding them. That is the sally port." She firmed her jaw, her fear replaced by a terrible resolve. "I'm going." Key looked from her face to the alley where the girl had vanished. He looked back at the thug, who was now laughing with Bannon, pocketing the silver Key had thrown. Dry Fork. If Nate was with the syndicate, if he was alive, he would be at the depot. He would be at Dry Fork. The wind howled, whipping Eliza's hair across her face. Key's carefully constructed hozo, his fragile peace, was shattered. His past as a scout, the violence he had tried to bury, rose in him. His search for his brother had just become entangled with this woman's suicidal quest for justice. He exhaled, a long, slow breath of red dust. "You cannot go alone." "Then help me," she said, meeting his gaze. "I am not helping you," Key said, the words bitter. "I am looking for my brother." He swung up into the saddle. The Mustang sidestepped. Sensing the tension, he looked down at her, his face a mask of stone. He reached down his hand. Eliza Hart looked at the hand. She looked at the auction block, where Bannon was gesturing for his men to follow. She looked at the dust. She had risked her reputation and her safety to come west. Now she was risking her freedom. She took his hand. He pulled her up behind him, settling her on the horse's rump. "Hold on," he commanded. He wheeled the horse, digging in his heels. They did not gallop, but moved at a hard, steady trot that ate the ground. They moved past the Sentinel office, past the saloon. As they passed the square, the wind gusted, lifting the forged debt paper Bannon had dropped. It tumbled through the dust, and Eliza saw it clearly. At the bottom, embossed in the paper, was a logo, a snake coiled upon itself, its head raised, ready to strike. Eliza held her notebook tighter. She had her target. Key stared ahead, his eyes fixed on the gap between the hills that led toward the high country, toward the rail line, toward Dry Fork. Key did not take her to the livery stables. He pulled her past the stairs, past the silent judgment of the townspeople, and went straight to the small, clapboard building with the faded lettering, Silver Butte Sentinel. He half pushed her through the door. A thin man with ink stains up to his elbows looked up from the type bed, his face pale with dread. "Miss Hart, I heard. They were looking for you at the auction. Bannon has papers. A warrant." "It is fraudulent." "Arthur," Eliza said, catching her breath. She leaned against the doorframe, the adrenaline of the escape leaving her legs weak. "Hale's men. They are auctioning people." "No." Arthur Wells, the editor, said, his voice a low, fearful tremor. They are auctioning paper. In this territory, the paper is the only thing that matters. You cannot fight that. Eliza, you have to leave. Get out, now, before they come here. I am not leaving, Eliza said, pushing herself upright. That girl in the square, she told me, Dry Fork, the ghost depot? That is where they are taking them. I'm going to write about it. Write, Eliza. You cannot write your way out of this, Wells said, wringing his ink-stained hands. Dry Fork is syndicate land. It is a fortress. That is where Hale keeps his railroad inspectors. Who are they? Thugs, killers. The one you saw at the auction, the one with the bracelet. He is one of them. They are paid directly by Hale. They are his fist. Yazzie had been standing by the door, his body angled toward the street, his senses drinking in the cooling air, the sound of the town settling into evening. He turned his head, his eyes sharp. How do you know Hale pays them? Wells hesitated. He looked from Key to Eliza, then seemed to reach a decision. He knelt by his desk, pulling up a loose floorboard. From the dark space beneath, he lifted a heavy iron lockbox. I keep my own ledger, Miss Hart, he said, his hands shaking as he fitted a key to the lock. I note who pays for what in this town, who buys the advertisements, who buys the silence. Hale pays for a lot of silence. The smell hit Key an instant before the sound, not wood smoke, not cooking fire. It was the sharp, oily scent of kerosene. Out, Key said, his voice flat and urgent. Now. What? Wells asked, fumbling with the key. The front window did not just break. It exploded inward. A shower of glass and liquid fire, a glass jug, its wick still sputtering, landed on a stack of newsprint. The office went up in a roar. The dry paper, the ink, the wooden floors, the cleaning solvents they ignited in a single, devastating flash. The heat was a physical blow, sucking the air from their lungs. The press! Wells cried, scrambling backward, his hands raised as if to ward off the impossible. My press! It is iron! Key shouted, grabbing the editor by the collar. You are not the back door! He shoved Wells toward the rear of the shop. Black smoke instantly filled the small space, thick and choking. Eliza coughed, her eyes streaming. She grabbed for the lockbox, her fingers closing on the hot metal handle. Eliza! Key yelled, his voice muffled by the inferno. She had the box, but a burning beam from the ceiling crashed down, cutting off her path. The flames, bright and hungry, licked at the hem of her wool skirt. She cried out, a sharp sound of pain and terror. Key was on her. He did not hesitate. He grabbed her by the waist, lifting her clean off the floor, and threw his own body between her and the wall of flame. He plunged through the curtain of smoke, kicked the back door off its splintering hinges, and tumbled out into the dark alley, pulling her with him. Wells was already there, on his hands and knees, coughing up soot. They scrambled behind the cold adobe wall of the neighboring tannery. They gulped the clean, cold night air, their lungs burning. They watched as the roof of the Sentinel office folded in on itself, sending a column of sparks and orange flame high into the dark Arizona sky. The town fire bell began to ring, a frantic, useless sound against the roar. They burned it, Wells whispered, his voice broken. He was weeping, silent tears cutting trails through the soot on his cheeks. They burned the truth. They waited. They waited for hours. The volunteer bucket brigade, disorganized and fearful, did just enough to keep the flames from spreading to the tannery. By 2 a.m, the fire had died, leaving a steaming, blackened skeleton of a building. The crowd was gone. Key led Eliza back into the alley. The air smelled of wet ash and loss. The lockbox was half buried in charred paper and wreckage. It was warped, the metal glowing a dull cherry red in the center. We have to wait, Eliza said, her teeth chattering from cold and shock. No time, Key said. He tore a strip of canvas from a discarded wagon cover, wrapped his hands, and hauled the box out of the embers. He dropped it in the dirt and used a length of cooled rebar to prise the warped lid open. Inside, the contents were a scorched, fragile mess. The top papers turned to black confetti when Eliza touched them, but the ledger, bound in thick leather, had been protected. The cover was destroyed, the pages curled and brown, but the ink, written in Wells's meticulous hand, was legible. Eliza knelt in the filth of the alley, pulling the damaged book onto her lap. She paged through it, her fingers tracing the spidery script. "Here," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She pointed. "Payment, M. Hale. Accounted, $2,000. The entry was dated just 4 days ago. The reason for payment: railroad inspection crew, V. Pike, foreman. V. Pike, Eliza breathed. I have seen that name. In the land deeds. He is Hale's right hand, Key said, his voice low and hard. He moves the things Hale does not want seen. He was a scout killer for the army. I know his name. He enjoys his work. Look, Eliza said, pointing to the margin beside the entry. Wells had made a small notation, a symbol he must have copied from a waybill. It was a circle with a horizontal line and a T shape underneath. The depot symbol, Eliza said, her mind racing. The girl in the square said Dry Fork, the ghost depot. This is it. This connects Hale directly to Pike, and Pike to that depot. Ghost depot. Key repeated. He knew the place. It was an old army supply stop, abandoned after the wars, sitting miles from anywhere. It was connected only by the syndicate's new spur line. A perfect place to hide things, or people. And this, Eliza said, turning the fragile, burnt page. Arthur was tracking the trains. A schedule. Train number 19. Departure Dry Fork. Destination Yuma Yard. Territorial border. The date written next to it was 3 days from now. 3 days, Eliza said, looking up at Key, the glow of the embers catching the fear in her eyes. They are shipping them out of the territory, where no one can follow. We have 3 days. They found what was left of Arthur Wells in the livery stable, hiding in the hayloft. He was a broken man. It is over, Wells whispered, not looking at them. You cannot fight them. Eliza, they have guns, they have the law, they have the paper. Then we will find a different law, Eliza said. At first light, she marched to the deputy sheriff's office. Key followed, a silent shadow. His face was set, his eyes heavy. The office was a small room with a barred window. Deputy Clark sat with his boots on the desk, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. He was a heavy man, his vest drained, his mustache stained with tobacco. He did not seem surprised to see them. Well, Miss Hart, heard you had some excitement last night. Terrible accident. Those coal oil lamps, they are a danger. My office was burned to the ground, Deputy, Eliza said, her voice shaking with rage. By Merrick Hale's men. Clark sighed, slowly taking his boots off the desk. Proof, ma'am, that is a strong accusation. Eliza slapped the scorched ledger onto his desk. The impact sent up a small puff of ash. A payment ledger, Hale to V. Pike, the head of the inspectors, the same men who assaulted me in the town square yesterday, the same men who forged a warrant for my arrest. Clark squinted at the book. He did not open it. He pushed it back toward her with one thick finger. I see, he said slowly. A private account book, found in the ashes. Could have been written by anyone. You got a witness, Mr. Wells. He seems to have left town. Took the 4 o'clock stage. You know he ran out. I know no such thing. And this, he picked up a crisp piece of paper from his desk. This is still active. A civil warrant for your arrest. $200. Miss Hart, signed by the magistrate. It is fraudulent. It is a lie. Paper is paper, ma'am, Clark said, his voice greasy with false patience. The judge signed it. Now, you are an educated woman. You do not belong here. You are stirring up trouble. You start making noise about morality and people get nervous. They are selling human beings. They are enforcing legal contracts. Now, I have a duty. This warrant. What do you want? Key asked. His voice was quiet, but it stopped Clark cold. The deputy's eyes shifted to Key. He did not like the way the dying warrior stood. Perfectly calm, perfectly centered, as if he were made of rock. I want peace in this town, Clark said, his eyes narrowing. I am authorized to see the moral character of our citizens. We do not like agitators. We do not like vagrants consorting with single ladies. He looked back at Eliza, his meaning clear. This warrant. He tapped the paper. It goes away. You get on the noon stage. You go back to Boston. You write about flower shows. If you are not on that stage, I am executing this warrant, and you will be charged with vagrancy, public disturbance, and moral endangerment. You will find, Miss Hart, that paper chains you just as tight as iron. Eliza stared at him. The full, crushing weight of the conspiracy settled on her. The law was not just blind. It was a weapon, pointed right at her. We are done here, Key said. He took Eliza's arm and pulled her out of the office, back into the cold morning sunlight. They stood in the alley beside the livery. The town was coming to life, the sound of hammers and wagons filling the air. They were fugitives. Eliza leaned against the adobe wall, closing her eyes. The anger that had carried her, the righteous fury, finally cracked, revealing the cold fear beneath. He is right, she whispered. The paper. It is all that matters. My father, my real father, lost everything, our house, our name, all because of a signature he did not read, a debt he guaranteed for a friend. I watched them auction our furniture. I watched my mother. I thought if I came here, if I used words, I could fight it. But it is the same. It is just paper. We cannot win. Key watched her. He saw the crack in her Eastern armor. He saw the real, deep fear. It was the fear of the trap. He turned his gaze north, toward the high, cold mesas. Dry Fork was a 2-day ride, if you followed the canyons. His own conflict churned, cold and sharp. Nate. He had dreamed of finding his brother. He had imagined Nate working a ranch, or maybe even married, living a hard but decent life. He had imagined handing him back the blue bracelet. The one Key now knew was on the wrist of a brute. What if Nate was that brute? What if the boy he knew, the one who taught him how to laugh, was gone? What if he was one of them? A slaver, a killer. The question was a stone in his gut. Do I save the people or do I save my brother? What if they were not the same thing? What if he rode to Dry Fork, found Nate, and had to choose between his blood and this woman's justice? He looked at Eliza. She had composed herself. She pushed off the wall, wiping the soot from her face with her sleeve. Her eyes were clear again, hard as agate. There is one chance, she said. The law here is bought, but the territory of the federal law is different. There is a federal judge in Riverbend, Judge Caldwell. He is new. They say he is honest. Key nodded. He knew the name. Riverbend was 50 miles past Dry Fork. A hard ride. The plan, Eliza said, thinking aloud, is to bypass this town. Go to Dry Fork. Get that main ledger, the one from the depot, the one that proves the trafficking, not just the payments. Then we take it, and any victims we can free. To Riverbend. We put the truth in front of Caldwell before that train leaves. She looked at him. It is suicide. I know that, and it is not your fight. That is where you are wrong, Key said, his voice rough. The man with my brother's bracelet. He works for V. Pike. He will be at Dry Fork. He saw the path. It was not a path to Hozo. It was a path back into the old world. The blue coat, the violence. But it was the only path that led to Nate. We need horses, food, water, Key said. We cannot use the road. We will follow the arroyo. It is slower, but they will not look for us there. Eliza let out a breath she felt she had been holding since Boston. 3 days, she said. We have 3 days to stop that train. She stood before him, the soot and smoke still clinging to her, her skirt hem charred and ragged. She was a writer without a press, a citizen with a warrant for her arrest. I do not know how to track, she said, her voice quiet. I do not know how to ride that hard. I do not know how to shoot. All I know is how to read a ledger. All I have is the paper. Key looked at her, this strange, breakable, iron-willed woman. I will handle the trail, he said. He held out his hand. It was rough, calloused, and stained with the soot of her burned office. Eliza looked at his hand, then at her own, which was soft, stained with ink. She placed her hand in his. His grip was strong and warm. It was the first human contact that had felt safe in months. And I, Eliza said, her voice firm, will handle the paper. They shook, once, a hard binding agreement. Key released her hand and turned toward the back of the livery, where he knew the station manager kept 2 fast, unmarked horses. We're riding now. They did not ride the main road. Key led her through the tangled alleys of Silver Butte, past the tannery, and to the back of the livery stable, where he took 2 horses that were not his. He stole them with a practiced, unapologetic calm, along with 2 canteens, a bag of dried jerky, and a rifle he pulled from the scabbard of a sleeping night watchman's saddle. Can you ride? He asked, thrusting the reins of a bay mare at her. I can sit on a horse, Eliza answered, her voice tight. Do not expect grace. Grace will not keep you alive. He helped her mount, his grip hard on her arm, and they moved. They left the town not with a gallop, but with a quiet, ground-eating trot, disappearing into the vast, pre-dawn shadows of the territory. They rode south for an hour, putting distance between themselves and the town, before turning east, into the deep, winding cut of a dry arroyo. The sand was deep, slowing the horses, but the high, rocky walls hid them from view. They had been riding for perhaps 2 hours, the sun just a pink smear on the horizon. When Key raised his hand, he stopped so suddenly Eliza's horse nearly ran into his. What is it? She whispered. Key did not answer. He was listening, his head tilted. He dismounted, the rifle now in his hands. The silence of the desert was immense. Eliza heard it then. Not a threat, a whimper, a child's sound. Key moved forward, his boots silent in the sand. Eliza followed, her heart pounding. Under a rocky overhang, partially hidden by a cluster of dead greasewood, they found them. The 2 Paiute children from the auction. The boy, perhaps 8 years old, stood over his younger sister, who was huddled on the ground, shaking with cold. The boy held a sharp piece of stone. When he saw Key, his face contorted in fear, but he did not run. He held the stone out, ready to fight. We mean no harm, Eliza said, stepping past Key, her hands raised and open. We were at the auction. You are free. He paid. The boy's eyes darted to Key. He recognized the man who had thrown the silver dollars in the dust. He lowered the stone, but his body remained tense. You are free, Key said, his voice quiet. He used a few words of Paiute, then switched back to simple English. Go home. Go back to your people. The boy shook his head, his eyes wide. He pointed back in the direction of Silver Butte. Men, he whispered. They look, they follow, they look for you. Key moved to the edge of the arroyo. Scanning their back trail, he saw nothing, but the boy's fear was real. Deputy Clark's men, or Bannon's, they were not just looking for Eliza. They were cleaning up loose ends. The children were witnesses. Eliza looked at the little girl, who was wrapped in a thin, ragged shawl. She was not crying. just trembling, her eyes fixed on Eliza's face. "Key," Eliza said, her voice low. "We cannot leave them." Key closed his eyes for a brief second. He had sought balance. The world was giving him chaos. He had bought these children. In the eyes of his own people, that meant he was now responsible for them. This was not a legal paper. This was a moral one. He let out a long breath. "They will slow us down. We do not have enough food." "We will manage," Eliza said. "We cannot leave them to those men." He nodded. The decision made, he walked back to the horses. He took the heavier wool blanket from his own bedroll. He went to the little girl and wrapped it around her, lifting her easily. She weighed almost nothing. He placed her in front of him on his saddle, her small head resting against his chest. "The boy rides with you," he commanded. Eliza looked at the boy, then at her saddle. "I can barely stay on my own." "Then you will learn," Key said. He lifted the boy and set him behind Eliza. "Hold on to her," he told the child, who wrapped his thin arms tightly around her waist. The journey changed. It was no longer an escape. It was a rescue. They rode all day. The arroyo snaked east, paralleling the new rail line that ran on the high mesa above them. The wind was relentless, carrying the red sand that coated their skin, their clothes, their lungs. Eliza's legs ached, her hands raw from the reins, but every time she felt she would fall, the small, cold hands of the boy tightened around her, and she straightened her spine. As night fell, a deep, penetrating cold settled over the land. Key led them out of the arroyo, up a hidden deer trail. Eliza could see nothing, no lights, no shelter. "Where are we going?" she asked, her teeth chattering. "Hosho," Key said. He led them to a spot that looked like any other patch of high desert. Only when they were almost upon it did Eliza see the low, octagonal structure built of earth and juniper logs. A traditional dine hogan, smoke, smelling of cedar, whispered from the smoke hole in the roof. An old woman stepped out as they approached. She was timeless, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her silver hair pulled back in a traditional bun. She wore a velvet blouse and a heavy turquoise necklace. She looked at Key. Then her eyes moved to Eliza, the white woman, her clothes torn and dirty. Then to the two Paiute children, wrapped in blankets. Her expression did not change. She was Shiyaj, Key's aunt. Key spoke in Dine, his voice low and respectful. He spoke for a long time. Eliza caught words, paper, fire, hail, children. He did not speak of Nate, not yet. Shiyaj listened. When he was finished, she nodded. Once. She walked to Key's horse and gently took the sleeping girl from his arms. "Ya'ati, Shiyaji," she murmured. "Welcome, my little one." She looked at Eliza. "There is stew," she said, her English clear. "You will eat, then we will smoke. The ones who run need balance." The inside of the hogan was one round room, warm and smelling of mutton, smoke, and wool. A fire burned in the central pit. Against one wall stood a large, vertical loom. A complex rug was halfway finished, its pattern a sharp, dynamic series of zigzags. They ate, the hot stew burning away the cold. The children ate with a desperate, silent hunger. Afterwards, Shiyaj brought out a pouch of herbs. She lit the dried sage and cedar, letting the sweet, pungent smoke fill the hogan. She chanted, a low song that sounded as old as the rocks outside. She fanned the smoke over Key, over his head, his hands, his heart. Then she turned to Eliza. Eliza hesitated, but Key nodded. She stood, and the old woman bathed her in the smoke. Finally, Shiyaj blessed the children, her hands gentle on their hair. "You are hunting ghosts," Shiyaj said, looking at Key. "You hunt the man with no face, and the brother who is a shadow." Key stiffened. "You know." "I know," she said. "The wind told me. This path you walk, it leads away from Hosho. It leads back to the blue coat. It is the only path that leads to Nate, Key said, his voice tight. Shayaj looked at Eliza. And you come with your paper. You think paper will stop this? It is the only weapon I have. Eliza said, It is a weak weapon. Shayaj said, But you are here. We will ask for protection for your journey. Eliza could not sleep. The children were curled together on a pallet. Key sat by the fire, cleaning his rifle, his face lost in shadow. Eliza rose and went to the loom. She touched the tightly woven wool, the lightning pattern. It is beautiful, she whispered. Shayaj, who had been sitting, carding wool, came to stand beside her. It is the story of the storm, the power, the danger. Teach me, Eliza said, surprising herself. The old woman looked at her. Then a small, dry smile touched her lips. She handed Eliza the shuttle, a smooth piece of wood wrapped in dark red wool. She showed her how to pass it between the warp threads, how to use the heavy, comb-like tool to pack the row down. Eliza's hands, so deft with a pen, were clumsy. The thread snagged. The tension was uneven. My mother taught me to weave, Key said, his voice coming from the shadows. Eliza looked over, startled. He had not moved. Was she a weaver? Eliza asked, her voice soft. She was many things, Key said. He stared into the fire. She was not quiet. Like my aunt, she was a laughing woman. She taught me to ride, to hunt. She said there was humor in the wind. If you listened, she made the bracelet, the one I saw. Nate's bracelet, Eliza whispered. Key nodded, his jaw tightening. She gave it to him, for protection, after she was gone. The silence in Hogan was heavy, filled with the things he did not say. Eliza turned back to the loom and passed the shuttle again. She finished one single, crooked line of red. Shayaj touched the uneven row. The first line is the hardest. The old woman said, It sets the tension for all that follows. They left before dawn. Key's head was clear, the smoke ceremony having settled his spirit, even if it had not solved his problems. Shayaj packed food for them. She pressed a heavy, folded blanket into Eliza's hands. It was an older one, thick wool, woven with the same sharp, lightning pattern. For the children, she said, The storm is coming. She was right. They had been riding for only a few hours, the arroyo opening into a wide, desolate plain. When the sky changed, the air went still. Then the wind returned, not as a breeze, but as a low, screaming whine. The sky in the west turned a sickly yellow, then a deep, churning red. Sandstorm, Key yelled over the rising howl. Hold the children, cover your face. It hit them like a solid wall. The world vanished, replaced by a suffocating, stinging cloud of sand. It was impossible to see, to breathe. Eliza's mare screamed and reared. Eliza clung to the saddle horn. Her other arm clamped around the boy, who was coughing. Key grabbed her bridle, his own horse fighting him. This way to the rocks. He pulled them, blind, toward a sheer cliff face he knew was there. The wind tore at them, trying to rip them from the saddles. Eliza thought her lungs would burst. Here! Key's voice was a raw shout. Eliza saw a crack in the rock, a narrow opening, a slot canyon. Key forced his horse inside, pulling Eliza's mare after him. They stumbled into the narrow passage. The horses panicked. Just as the full force of the storm hit, the sound was a deafening roar, like a train passing inches from their heads. They were in near darkness, the air still thick with choking dust. The horses stamped, their eyes wild. A sharp crack echoed from above. Eliza against the wall, Key yelled. He saw it, a piece of the cliff, dislodged by the wind, a heavy chunk of sandstone. He shoved Eliza, the boy, and his own horse hard against the canyon wall. The rock fell, striking the opposite side, shattering, but a sharp, fist-sized piece flew sideways. Key tried to duck, but it was too fast. It glanced off the wall and struck him hard on the side of the head, above the temple. He grunted, a sharp exhalation of pain, and stumbled to his knees. "Key!" Eliza screamed, scrambling off her horse, pushing the boy behind her. Key was leaning against the wall, his head bowed. He put a hand to his temple. When he pulled it away, it was covered in dark blood. "It is nothing," he hissed, his teeth gritted. "Sit down," Eliza commanded, her voice shaking but firm. She pushed him down. The two children huddled by the horses, their faces pale with terror. Eliza fumbled in her saddlebag, then realized it was useless. She grabbed the hem of her own petticoat and ripped a long, clean strip of cotton. Her hands were shaking. She poured precious water from her canteen onto the cloth. "Let me see." She pushed his hand away. The gash was ugly, already swelling, bleeding freely into his black hair. He winced as she cleaned it, her touch not gentle, but efficient. "You are a terrible patient," she said, her voice dry, a brittle attempt to cover her terror. He let out a short, pained laugh. "You are a rough doctor." She tied the bandage, pulling it tight. The bleeding slowed. They sat in the roaring darkness, the wind shrieking through the canyon opening like a living thing. "Well," Eliza said, her voice quiet, catching her breath. "When I get to write this story, I will need all the details, so you owe me one dispatch that is not covered in your own blood." Key looked at her. In the dim light, he could see her face, streaked with red dust and grime. Her hat was gone. Her hair was a wild, dark tangle, but her eyes were steady. He almost smiled. "I will try." The storm lasted for 6 hours. When it finally passed, it left a new world, scoured and silent. Key's head throbbed, but he was steady. They had lost a full day. He pushed them hard, riding into the dusk. He knew the Pinkertons would be moving again. Late in the afternoon, Key dismounted, examining the ground where the arroyo met the railroad embankment. "Riders," he said, his voice grim. "5 of them. Pinkertons. They passed during the storm, looking for shelter. Now they are backtracking. They will find our trail this morning." "Are they ahead of us at Dry Fork?" Eliza asked. "No, they are hunting us." Key scanned the empty landscape. "Give me 10 minutes." He took Eliza's horse and his own, walking them backward, brushing away their tracks with a sage branch. He led them over a patch of slick rock that would hold no prints, creating a confusing, false trail that led up a shallow box canyon. It was the old scout's art. "It will not hold them for long," he said, returning. "But it will buy us time. We ride." They followed the railroad line, staying in the deep ditch cut for drainage. The tracks were a constant reminder of the syndicate's power. They came upon a short siding where a single, dilapidated freight car sat abandoned, its side door hanging open. "Wait," Eliza said, sliding off the mare before Key could stop her. "Eliza, we do not have time." "Just a moment." She ran to the car, scrambling up the embankment. Key cursed, grabbing his rifle, moving to cover her. The children watched, silent. Eliza slipped inside the car. The smell of old waste, fear, and sweat hit her. Even in the open air, the car was empty, but the floor was dark with old, grim stains. In the far corner, she saw it, a set of small, rusted shackles. The cuff was tiny, a child. Tucked into a crack in the wall, she found more. A small bundle of gray hair tied with a leather string. A single, blue trading bead. "Eliza, now!" Key's voice was urgent. "Key, look!" She emerged from the car, holding the shackle. His face went hard as stone. As she turned, her boot scuffed a piece of paper lying in the straw. It was a torn ledger sheet, identical to the ones in Wells's burned office. It was a list of names, Maria, Sose, Lena, John Two Feathers. Beside them, notations. At the bottom, stamped in purple ink, was the symbol for the ghost depot, and scrawled next to it in thick grease pencil was a new mark, a bold V intersected by a P. V. Pike, Eliza breathed. His mark, his inventory, this is the proof. A shout echoed from a mile down the track. They are coming, Key said, his voice deadly calm. They found the false trail. Eliza shoved the paper into her shirt. She kept the shackle. She ran, sliding down the embankment. Key hauled her onto the mare. They did not spare the horses. They galloped, plunging back into the deepest part of the arroyo, the sound of the pursuit faint behind them. They rode until the horses were lathered and darkness was complete. They made a cold camp under a sandstone ledge. No fire, the temperature dropping fast. The children, exhausted, slept instantly, wrapped together in the thick lightning blanket. Eliza sat apart, the small, cold shackle in her hands. She was shaking, but not from the cold. You are angry, Key said. He sat near her, the rifle across his knees, his bandaged head a pale blur in the starlight. Yes, she whispered, her voice thick. I am angry. I thought the paper was the weapon, the law, the ledgers, this. She held up the steel cuff. This is something else. It is the same. Key said, the paper, the steel, they are both chains. One you can see, the other you cannot, until it is too late. Your aunt the Hozo, how do you find balance? How do you live in a world that has this in it? Key looked at the children, sleeping under the blanket woven with the storm pattern. Freedom is not a gift. Eliza, he said, his voice quiet, echoing her own words from a lifetime ago. It is not something you find, like Hozo. It is something you hold. You grip it. You do not let go, even when your hands bleed. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the pain from his wound, the exhaustion, the terrible weight of the brother he was hunting. She clutched the shackle. Dry Fork, she said. Tomorrow, Key replied, looking north into the darkness. Tomorrow. We ride into the storm. They rode through the rest of the night, resting the horses only when the animals were ready to drop. The children, exhausted beyond fear, slept, bundled together, passed between Key and Eliza as they traded. Key's head ached, a dull, pounding drum that matched the hoofbeats. Dry Fork was not a town, it was a scar. They left the horses and the children hidden deep in a wash, a mile south of the depot, concealed by a stand of juniper. The boy, who had finally told them his name was Sam, was old enough to hold the reins. Do not move, Key commanded him, his voice low. Do not make a sound. We will come back, or we will not. If we do not, you wait until the next sun. Then you follow the water east. You understand? The boy nodded, his face pale, his eyes far too old. Key and Eliza moved on foot, staying below the level of the plain, using the arroyos and the shadows. The ghost depot was an old, failed army outpost, revived by the railroad. It consisted of a water tower, a long, low depot building, a small, separate office, and 3 sidings where freight cars sat. Silent. The entire compound was surrounded by a high barbed wire fence, new and glinting in the faint moonlight. The place felt dead, but lights burned in the small office, and a plume of smoke rose from the chimney of the main depot. That is where they are keeping them, Eliza whispered, pointing to the depot's boarded-up windows. The office first, Key said. The ledger, then the people. The wind had picked up a high, thin whistle that made the cables on the water tower groan and clang together. A rhythmic, metallic sound. Cover. I will go high. Key said, I will watch. You are the one who breaks the window. Eliza looked at the small, dark office. I am the one with the paper. He moved away. vanishing into the darkness like smoke. Eliza felt her heart hammer against her ribs. She was a reporter. She was a woman of words and ink. She crept forward, a heavy, sharp stone in her hand. Key scaled the water tower first, moving up the ladder with a silent, fluid grace, his injured head a distant pain. From the top, he could see the layout. 2 guards, smoking by the barbed wire gate. 1 man on the walkway of the depot itself. He could not see inside the office. He moved, dropping from the tower to the depot roof. Crawling along the peak, he settled in the shadow of the chimney, his rifle ready. He could see the office window from here. He could see Eliza, a small, dark shape, flattened against the back wall. The wind howled. The cables clanged. Clang, clang, clang. Eliza took a deep breath. She wrapped her hand in the hem of her skirt, raised the rock, and struck the glass. The sound was sharp, but the wind snatched it away. She quickly, carefully, broke out the remaining shards. She listened. Nothing. No shouts. She pulled herself up and through the opening, dropping into the dark, silent room. It smelled of stale tobacco, whiskey, and ink. She found a lamp on the desk, the glass globe still warm. She turned the wick up, just enough to cast a pale, flickering circle of light. She was in Pike's office, and on the desk, open, was the master ledger. It was worse than she had imagined. This was not just debt. This was a catalog. She ran her finger down the pages. Names, ages, Ilara, Irish, 18, contracted, Sosa, Paiute, 14, indenture, Lena, Dine, found. Page after page of women, of children, of immigrants, all listed next to a cash value. She saw the seal of the Silver Butte magistrate, stamped in purple ink, validating these contracts. The impression was crooked, hurried, a forgery. Then she found it. The last page. A schedule. Train number 19. Departure 2 days. Destination Yuma Yard. Contents contracted labor. This was it. This was the proof. This was the weapon. Key watched from the roof. He saw the faint glow of her lamp. The yard was quiet. The guards were settling. Bored. He shifted, his shoulder protesting, and scanned the depot. He was looking for one thing, the glint of blue stone. He saw nothing. The door to the office opened. Eliza froze, her hand on the ledger. She did not even have time to breathe. A large man filled the doorway, his bulk blocking the light from the hall. He was grinning, a cigar clamped in his teeth. It was V. Pike. Well, what do we have here? He rumbled, his voice full of cruel amusement. He stepped into the room. A little mouse. I heard about you, the reporter. Come to see the books. Eliza stared at him, paralyzed. I like a woman with spirit, Pike said, walking toward her. Makes the work more interesting. Behind him, another man stepped into the room. He was younger, dressed in a long duster, his face hidden in the shadow of his hat brim. He carried a rifle. Check the rest of the building. Nate, Pike ordered, not looking at him. See if she brought any friends. The younger man did not move. Eliza's eyes were fixed on the second man. On his left wrist, half hidden by the cuff of his duster, was a simple, heavy bracelet of silver and turquoise. On the roof, Key saw Pike enter. He saw the second man. He saw the bracelet. His world stopped. The wind, the pain in his head, the cold, it all vanished. He saw the blue stones his mother had polished. He saw the man turn his head slightly, and in the dim lamplight, Key saw the sharp line of his jaw, the scar above his left eye from a fall. It was Nate. It was his brother. Nate Benally had not looked at the woman. His eyes had been drawn to the broken window, and then, by some instinct, to the roof line above. He saw the shape. A man, silhouetted against the paler night sky. He knew that stillness. He had seen it on 100 hunts. "Key," he whispered, the sound stolen by the wind. Pike drew his pistol. "Step away from the desk, lady. You are done writing." "Let her go, Pike!" The voice came from the walkway, just outside the window. Key had dropped from the roof, his knife in his hand, his face a mask of cold fury. Pike laughed, a short, barking sound. "Well, the scout. Come for your girlfriend, you are outnumbered." He gestured with his pistol toward Nate. "Son, cover the window. He moves. You shoot him." Nate Benally turned. He saw his brother, standing 10 feet away, blood from an old wound crusted in his hair, a killing knife in his hand. Key was staring, not at Pike, but at him, at the bracelet. Nate's face was a ruin. It was his brother, his older brother, the one he had worshipped, the one he thought was dead, and he was standing on the wrong side of a gun. He raised his rifle. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He aimed it directly at Key's chest. "Key!" Nate's voice was a ragged tear. "You should not be here. You have to go." "He is one of yours," Pike sneered, his eyes darting between them, enjoying this. "Even better." He looked at Nate, his voice hardening. "He is mine. Scout. I found this one in a Y_U_ma jail, half dead from a knife in his gut and ready to hang for it. Mr. Hale paid the doctor. Mr. Hale bought the rope from the sheriff. His life belongs to the syndicate. Is that not right, Nate?" Nate's face was slick with sweat. He did not lower the rifle. "Please, Key, go. There is nothing for you here. Just go." Key looked at his brother. He saw the agony in his eyes. He saw the trap, a chain made of a life debt, stronger than any paper. This was the blood debt. Nate was not just working for Pike. He was owned by him. Key could not kill his brother. He could not let Eliza be taken. He let his knife fall from his hand. It clattered on the wooden walkway. He spoke. His voice was soft, not in English, but in the old childhood dine. The words for mother, the words for home. He said, "Little brother, I am here." Nate's face broke. A sob tore from his throat. His rifle wavered. Pike saw it, his eyes narrowing in rage. "You worthless!" It was the moment Eliza needed. She grabbed the one weapon she had, the massive, heavy ledger. She swung it with all her strength, up and into the glass globe of the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. "Get her!" Pike roared, firing his pistol blindly. The shot illuminated the room in a flash, showing Eliza already diving for the broken back window. Key was moving. He grabbed Eliza as she tumbled through the opening, pulling her up. "Run!" An alarm bell began to clang, a frantic hammering sound, adding to the noise of the wind. Shouts erupted from the depot. "This way!" Key pulled her, racing through the rail yard, not for the open desert, but for the line of parked cars. Gunshots cracked behind them. "In here!" Key saw an open hopper car, half filled with coal. He shoved Eliza toward it, pushing her up. She scrambled, falling onto the hard, black lumps. Key grabbed the ladder to follow. A bullet screamed past his head. Another tore through the thick muscle of his left shoulder, spinning him around. He grunted, the pain a searing white fire, and fell into the car, landing hard on the coal. Nate Benally ran out of the office, rifle in hand, Pike right behind him. "Where are they?" Nate saw the figures, one disappearing into the coal car. He saw his brother, exposed on the ladder. He raised his rifle. He took aim. He fired. The shot was loud, echoing off the buildings. Key already falling, felt the wind of the shot pass him. Nate worked the lever, firing again, this time at the empty night sky. The muzzle flashed bright. "He is hit!" Nate yelled, his voice desperate. "I hit him. He is in the car. I got him." "Idiot," Pike snarled, shoving him toward the fence. "We will find their bodies at dawn. Get the men. They will not get past the wire." in the darkness, covered in coal dust. Key pushed Eliza to the far side of the hopper. The bottom gate was slightly ajar. "Out!" he hissed, his voice strained with pain. They slipped out the bottom, landing on the gravel of the rail bed. They crawled under the next car, and the next, until they were at the edge of the yard. They slipped under the lowest strand of barbed wire and melted back into the deep shadows of the arroyo. It was almost dawn when they reached the children. Eliza, her face streaked with coal dust and tears, tore another strip from her petticoat. She packed it against Key's shoulder. The wound was a deep, bloody graze, passing clean through. It was painful, but no bones were broken.
"He shot you?"
she whispered, her hands shaking as she tied the bandage.
"Your brother?"
Key leaned against the sandstone wall, his face gray. He watched the sky turn from black to purple. "No," he said, his voice flat.
"He missed. He aimed for the sky?"
Eliza looked at him, at the blood soaking the bandage. Then she looked at the heavy, scorched ledger in her lap. They had the proof. They had names. They had the schedule. But Nate was still there, a prisoner, bound by a debt of blood. "We go to Riverbend," Eliza said. Her voice was no longer that of a reporter. It was hard as steel. "We found Judge Caldwell. We expose Hale. We stop that train." Key pushed himself to his feet, clutching his shoulder.
"Yes, and I am getting my brother back."
They rode east, the rising sun at their backs. 2 days later, as they neared the weary, hopeful lights of Riverbend, they saw it, nailed to a telegraph pole at the edge of town. The ink is still fresh. A flyer. Wanted. For theft, arson, and malicious vagrancy. $100 reward. Below the words were 2 names, Eliza Hart and her Indian accomplice. They did not stop in Riverbend. The town was just another, larger version of Silver Butte, its streets filled with wary eyes and syndicate money. The wanted poster, with its stark promise of $100, had made them ghosts. They were no longer citizens seeking justice. They were fugitives. They hid the horses in a deep, scrub-filled arroyo south of the town, settling the 2 Paiute children, Sam and his sister, into a cold camp. The boy, Sam, was strong. He took the last of the jerky. "We will wait," he said, his voice flat. Eliza looked at Key. His shoulder was a mess of torn cloth and dark, sluggish blood. His face was gray with pain.
"Key, you cannot go on,"
she whispered, her hands clenched. "We are here. Judge Caldwell is here. We have the ledger. This is enough. This is where your fight ends." Key was staring, not at her, but north, back the way they had come. He touched the scorched, heavy ledger she held wrapped in canvas. "That is paper," he said, his voice a low rasp. "The people on that list are still on the train." Eliza checked the ledger again. Train number 19. The schedule was clear. It had not left yet. It was scheduled to depart Dry Fork at dawn, tomorrow. "It is moving east," Key said, as if to himself. "To get to the Yuma line. It has to cross the canyon. It has to pass Red Finch Bridge." "We cannot," Eliza said, her voice breaking. "They are hunting us. Pike will have men everywhere. You are wounded. We have the proof. Let the judge send the marshals." "The judge will send a telegraph." Key said, "Hale's men will read it. The train will disappear. The people will disappear." He looked at her, his eyes dark with a pain that had nothing to do with his shoulder. "My brother is on that train." He pushed himself to his feet, hissing as his shoulder screamed, "I am going to that bridge. You are staying here. You will take the ledger to Caldwell. You will take the children. You will finish your part." "No," Eliza said. The word was quiet, but absolute. She stood up, brushing the dust from her ruined skirt. "You said it yourself. You handle the trail. I handle the paper. That box," she pointed north, "is full of paper, and I'm going to get it." He stared at her, This impossible woman from the east, all ink and iron. He nodded. Once. Red Finch Bridge was a monument to greed. A spindly steel trestle built too fast and too high, spanning a 400-foot drop to the dry riverbed below. The wind moaned through its supports, a constant, high-pitched song of warning. 1 mile before the bridge, the tracks passed a small, isolated pump house and a massive wooden water tower, where the heavy engines took on water before the long, dry haul east. Key and Eliza lay on a ridge above the pump house, watching it in the cold moonlight. They had traveled all day, a grueling, silent ride, looping wide around Riverbend. Key's wound had been reopened. He had packed it with dry moss to stop the bleeding.
"The train will stop there,"
Eliza whispered, her breath fogging.
"At the tower. They have to fill the tender."
"Pike will expect us," Key said. "He knows we have the ledger. He knows we will try to stop the train. He will have guards." "He will expect us to use guns," Eliza said. She had been inside the pump house. A quick, silent reconnaissance while Key watched. Her face was grim. "But I know steam. That pump is old, but it is powerful. I can jam the governor. When the engineer engages the intake, I can overload the pressure. The safety valve will blow. It will make a sound like the end of the world. That is your diversion." Key looked at the setup, the train, the tower, the bridge. "When it screams, I go. I will get on the roof. Find the prison car."
"I found something else,"
Eliza said. She held up a small, greasy stick of dynamite and a coil of fuse.
"From the storage shed, for blasting Rock Falls.
While you are getting the people, I will be setting this." Key's head snapped toward her. "Where?" "Not the bridge," she said, her eyes hard.
"That would kill them all."
"No, the track, the heavy support rail, just before the trestle. I am not going to destroy the train. Key, I am going to paralyze it." The whistle came just before dawn, a lonely cry from the west. The headlight of train number 19 cut a bright, white cone through the darkness. Key tensed, his body coiled. His shoulder was a block of white-hot agony. He held his knife in his good hand. The heavy train, a long line of cattle cars, freight cars, and a single, dark caboose, hissed and groaned to a stop. The water tower chute swung over the tender. "Now," Key whispered. Eliza slipped away, vanishing into the shadows of the pump house. Key waited. He watched guards, 4 of them, walk the length of the train. One climbed onto the caboose roof, his rifle outlined against the pale sky. Then it happened. A low thrumming began, the sound of the pump. It rose in pitch, faster and faster. Then a terrible, high-pitched scream tore the air. It was not a whistle. It was a shriek, a metallic howl of agonizing pressure as the safety valve on the pump tower blew. Steam exploded from the top of the tower, a white geyser in the moonlight. The guards yelled, clutching their ears, looking up, blinded. Key moved. He sprinted from the rocks, using the noise, using the steam. He climbed the ladder of a cattle car, rolling onto the flat roof. The wind tried to tear him away. He ran, crouching, jumping the gaps between cars. A boot smashed down on his good hand. He roared in pain, nearly losing his grip. "V!" Pike stood over him, a heavy shotgun in his hands. He must have been waiting, hidden. "I knew you would come. Scout!" Pike bellowed over the screaming valve. "Come to die with your brother." Pike swung the butt of the shotgun, aiming for Key's head. Key rolled, the blow glancing off his wounded shoulder. The pain was so intense he almost blacked out. He saw Pike raise the gun, saw the black twin muzzles. A dark shape flew up from the ground below. A long, steel coupling hook, heavy and sharp. It clattered onto the roof between them. "Key!" Eliza yelled from the darkness. Key did not hesitate. He grabbed the hook, his right hand slipping, and swung it. Not at Pike, but at his knee. The steel hook hit bone. Pike roared, a sound of pure animal rage, and stumbled, his shot going wide into the night sky. Key was up. He ran, leaving Pike clutching his shattered knee. He ran past the guard on the caboose, who was still staring at the steam. He found the car. It had no windows. The door was a heavy sliding panel, secured by a thick steel bar and a massive padlock. The people he had come for were there. He jammed the sharp end of the coupling hook into the iron hasp that held the bar. He put his boot against the car wall. He pulled. The lock was held. He heard Pike behind him, roaring, "Shoot him! Shoot him!" Key turned his back to the door. He gripped the hook with his good hand. He threw his entire body, all his weight, backward. His wounded left shoulder took the impact. He felt a wet, tearing pop, a sound of separation. His vision went white. He screamed, a raw sound that mixed with the steam whistle. The hasp, the lock, and the bar exploded off the door. Key fell to his knees, his left arm hanging useless, dislocated, the pain a universe. The car door slid open. A woman, her face thin, her eyes huge in the darkness, stared out. She was dying. She clutched a small child. 5 other figures huddled behind her. "Blue beads," the woman whispered, seeing Key, seeing the pain on his face. "Thank the sky. You came." A rifle muzzle pressed against the back of Key's head. "Do not move. On," a voice whispered. Key froze. The voice was ragged, desperate. It was Nate. "He is here," Pike screamed, limping toward them. "Nate, kill him. Kill your brother." Key did not turn. He could not. "Key!" Nate's voice was a sob. "Run! You have to run! Take them!" Something cold and hard was shoved into Key's good hand. A key. "There is another car," Nate hissed. 2 cars down. "Go! Get them out! Run!" Nate turned. He spun, his rifle coming up. Just as Pike raised his shotgun, Nate fired. Not at Key, not at Pike. He shot the heavy lantern hanging from the caboose roof. It exploded, plunging the train into absolute darkness. "Run!" Nate yelled, shoving Key toward the side of the train. At that exact moment, Eliza, down by the tracks, lit the fuse. She had seen the prisoners. She had seen Nate. She had seen Pike. She pushed the sputtering fuse deep into the stick of dynamite wedged against the main support rail. "Get clear!" she shrieked. The train, its whistle finally silent, began to lurch forward, picking up speed, heading for the bridge. The explosion was not large, but it was perfect. It shattered the steel rail and the wooden ties beneath it. The massive engine hit the broken track. There was a sound of tortured, screaming metal. The train did not fall. It stopped. It died, lurching so violently that Kexample's Key, Nate, and Pike were thrown from the roof. The engine tilted, its front wheels hanging in the empty air, inches from the drop into the blackness of the canyon. It was paralyzed. Chaos. Men were yelling, jumping from the cars. "The box!" Eliza screamed. In the light from the tilted, burning engine, she saw it. Pike's file box. It had been in the caboose. It had been thrown clear, landing near the tracks, spilling its contents. She ran, ignoring the shouts, scooping up the box, grabbing the loose sheaves of paper, letters, lists, all in Merrick Hale's own hand. Nate, Key, was on the ground, his body on fire, his left arm useless. He looked for his brother. He saw him. Pike, his face a mask of blood. Had him. Pike was dragging Nate by the hair, his pistol pressed to Nate's temple. Pike had seen the betrayal. He had seen the key. "You!" Pike roared, his voice echoing under the high bridge. He looked at Eliza, standing there with the file box. "You want this traitor. You want your Indian accomplice." He smashed the butt of his pistol into Nate's face. Nate went down, a loose, broken heap. "Riverbend," Pike bellowed. hauling Nate to his feet. "The courthouse. You bring me that ledger you stole. You trade me. The ledger for the brother. You come, or he dies." Pike began dragging Nate back toward the engine, back toward the other guards. Key got to his feet. He looked at his brother. A prisoner. He looked at the 6 freed, terrified people, huddled by the tracks. He looked at Eliza, clutching the new proof. He had to choose. He grabbed Eliza's arm. "We go, now!" They disappeared into the arroyo, the sound of the hissing steam and Pike's fading curses chasing them into the dark. They reached Riverbend just after dawn, a ragged, haunted procession. Key, Eliza, the 6 freed prisoners who were mostly women and the 2 Paiute children. They were a walking accusation, caked in dust, coal, and blood. Key's arm was a torment. He had forced the dislocated joint back into place against the high, rocky wall of the arroyo. The sound of the pop swallowed by the wind, the pain so vast it had almost taken his sight. Now it hung, bound tight to his chest by a strip of Eliza's petticoat. A throbbing, useless weight. The town was not welcoming. It was frozen. Pike's lies had arrived first. The telegraph wires, humming with syndicate poison, had painted the story a violent dine scout. Key Yazzie had abducted the Eastern Reporter, burned the Sentinel, and was now inciting a prison break. The wanted poster was nailed to the marshal's office. "They will shoot us," Key said. His voice was a low rasp. They were hidden in an alley behind the livery, the children shivering. "We cannot walk in." "We will not hide," Eliza said. Her face was pale, but her eyes were burning with a cold fire Key had not seen before. "They have made us criminals. I will not be one." She looked at him. "Stay here. Guard them. Do not move." "Eliza, no, they will take you." "They will not," she said. "This is not a fight for the alleys anymore. This is a fight for the town square." She stepped out, alone. She straightened her torn, filthy skirt. She walked, her head high, down the center of the street. The few people who were out stopped, staring at the woman from the wanted poster, the one who was supposed to be a captive. She did not go to the courthouse. She went to the small, white-painted church. She found Father Michael, a thin man with kind eyes, preparing for morning mass. "Father," Eliza said, her voice clear, "I have 6 women and 2 children in the livery. They are the victims of a slave ring run by Merrick Hale. I am taking them to Judge Caldwell for protection. I am asking you to walk with us as a witness for God." Father Michael stared at her, then at the street, then back. He nodded, slowly, removing his vestments. Eliza left him and walked across the street, to the Golden Rail Saloon. It was empty, save for the proprietor, a large man named O'Malley, wiping glasses. Mr. O'Malley," Eliza said. "Merrick Hale's men are on their way here to stop me from delivering evidence of his crimes to Judge Caldwell. They will likely try to seize the courthouse by force. I imagine a gun battle in the town square is bad for your business." O'Malley stopped wiping. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It is." "I am asking you," Eliza said, "to stand with me as a witness for the town." O'Malley looked at his clean glass. He set it down. "I will come." Key watched from the alley. He could not believe what he was seeing. The procession formed, Eliza Hart in the center. On her right, Father Michael, his wooden cross clutched in his hand. On her left, O'Malley, the saloon keeper, his white apron still on. Behind them, Key emerged, his face a mask of pain, the useless coupling hook clutched in his good right hand. He led the small flock of women and children. They looked terrified, but they walked, following the reporter. The townspeople of Riverbend came to their doors. They saw the priest. They saw the saloon keeper. They saw the abducted woman walking free. They saw the wanted Indian accomplice, and he looked less like a kidnapper and more like a guardian. They saw the refugees, the story Pike had told, The one on the posters began to crack. They reached the courthouse. Judge Caldwell was waiting on the steps. He was a small, older man, his wire spectacles perched on his nose. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I have a federal warrant here for your arrest." "I know, Judge," Eliza said. She stopped at the bottom step. "And I have the evidence that proves that warrant is a fraud." She unslung the canvas satchel. She laid the scorched, water-damaged ledger from the Sentinel on the steps. Then she emptied Pike's file box. The letters, the lists, the forged contracts signed in Hale's own hand, spilled out. "This is Merrick Hale's account book," Eliza said, her voice carrying across the silent square. "He is not just enforcing debt. He is trafficking human beings. These women, these children, are his victims. We have stopped one of his trains. His men are coming here to get this evidence. They will not stop at the law." Judge Caldwell looked at the papers. He looked at the faces of the women. He picked up one of Hale's letters. His face went pale. Dear God in heaven. A rifle shot cracked. The bullet splintered the wood of the courthouse door, inches from the judge's head. "Inside," Key roared, shoving the judge and Eliza toward the door. "Get the women in the cells. They are safe there." A second shot shattered the front window. Pike was in the square. He was on horseback, his knee heavily bandaged, his face black with fury. He had 24 armed railroad thugs with him. They dismounted, fanning out, rifles ready. "Caldwell," Pike bellowed. "You are harboring criminals. Send out the reporter and the Indian, or we will burn this building to the ground." The townspeople scattered, screaming. Deputy Caldwell yelled from inside, "Lock the doors. We are under siege." The courthouse was solid, built of stone, but the windows were large. Glass exploded inward as the thugs opened fire, driving the judge and his deputy to the floor. "They are at the back door," the deputy cried, fumbling with his revolver. Key looked at Eliza. She was huddled with the women, shielding the children with her own body. "Stay with them," Key ordered. "Bar the door to the holding cells. Key, you cannot your arm." "I have one good one," he said. He gripped the heavy steel coupling hook. He moved into the main lobby. A wide room with a high ceiling, now filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. The front doors, the main oak doors, shuddered. The lock burst. The doors flew open. Pike limped in, a shotgun in his hands. 3 of his men followed. "Just you, scout," Pike sneered, his eyes wild. "I should have let you bleed out on the tracks." Pike fired. The blast was deafening in the enclosed space. Key was not there. He had rolled behind a heavy oak bench. The buckshot tore the bench apart. Key came up, one-handed, and threw the coupling hook. It was not a swing. It was a desperate, spinning toss. The heavy hook struck the shotgun, knocking it from Pike's grasp. Pike roared and lunged. He was a bull, a creature of pure, mindless rage. He knew Key was injured. He swung a massive, bruising fist. Key tried to dodge, but he was too slow, his body stiff with pain. The blow connected with Key's face. It was not a clean hit, but it was brutal. Key felt his lips split against his teeth. The taste of hot, salt blood filled his mouth. He staggered back, his vision swimming, and fell against the wall. Pike laughed, pulling a long knife. "Now you die." "Stop." The voice was not loud, but it was absolute. Merrick Hale stepped through the shattered doorway. He was immaculate. His gray suit was unruffled. His silver hair was perfect. He looked like a banker who had just entered his vault. 2 Pinkerton agents flanked him, their suits just as clean, their faces hard. "Mr. Pike," Hale said, his voice clipped with annoyance. "This is unacceptably crude. We are men of law." Hale looked past the fight, his eyes landing on Judge Caldwell, who was peering out from his chambers. "Judge," Hale said, "I am ending this farce." He produced a crisp document from his coat. "This is a federal warrant, superseding your local authority. It charges Miss Hart with sedition and conspiracy against the United States Railroad. It gives me full authority to detain her. My men will take her now." He saw Eliza, who had emerged from the back room, her face white. "The game is over, my dear," Hale said. He nodded to his Pinkertons. "Take her." Key saw it. He saw the two men move toward Eliza. He saw Pike, grinning, raising his knife to finish him. He tried to push himself off the wall, but his legs were weak. His mouth was full of blood. He had failed. He had failed his brother. He had failed her. Eliza looked at Hale's warrant, the clean, forged paper. She looked at the Pinkertons advancing on her. She looked at Key, slumping against the wall. His head bowed, blood dripping from his chin. She did not run to the judge. She did not scream. She walked. She walked past the Pinkertons, who paused, confused by her calm. She walked through the acrid smoke, past the shattered glass. She walked directly to Key. He looked up, his eyes hazy with pain. "Eliza," he managed, the word thick with blood. "Go! Run!" She put her hand on the side of his face. Her fingers were cold, but her touch was steady. She wiped the blood from his split lip with her thumb. "You owe me, Key Yazi," she whispered, her voice rough. He stared at her, uncomprehending. In the center of the gunfight, with Merrick Hale watching in cold disbelief and Pike frozen in murderous anticipation, Eliza Hart leaned in. She kissed him. She pressed her mouth to his, tasting the copper of his blood, the grit of the desert. It was not a kiss of romance. It was a kiss of life. It was a desperate, furious, binding oath. It was a promise that they were not done. It was the purest act of defiance she had ever committed. For a second, all the pain in Key's body, his shoulder, his ribs, his face was burned away, replaced by the shocking, impossible fire of her. He tasted his own blood on her lips. A sound tore from his chest. It was not a groan. It was a raw, broken laugh. His one good arm, the right one, shot up, wrapping around her, pulling her against him. He buried his face in her neck, in the mass of her dark hair that smelled of smoke and sage. He held her, his body trembling. He was shaking with pain, with rage, with a sudden, agonizing kaukati to live that he had not felt in years. He breathed her in, a single, shuddering gasp. It was the anchor he needed. He pulled back, his eyes, now clear and bright, locking with hers. His bloody mouth was split in a grin that was both terrifying and beautiful. "Now," he said. He grabbed her hand. He grabbed the coupling hook from the floor. They stood up, together. "That is my sister." The scream came from the street. A woman, a baker Key recognized from the market, had pushed past Pike's men. She was pointing, not at the guns, but at the judge's desk, at the ledger pages scattered on the floor. "Lena," she cried, rushing into the lobby, grabbing the paper. "That is her name, you monsters. You told us she had gone to work in California." The spell broke. The townspeople, who had been watching, frozen, now saw. They saw the baker weeping over the slave ledger. They saw the priest standing by the cell doors. They saw the saloon keeper pick up a fallen thug's rifle. "They are slavers," O'Malley roared. "Hale is a slaver." The crowd surged. They were not armed for a fight, but they were a wall of fury. They poured into the lobby, overwhelming Pike's men. They were not fighting for Key or Eliza. They were fighting for Lena. They were fighting for their town. "Stop them!" Hale screamed at his Pinkertons. But it was too late. The lobby was a melee of ranchers, bakers, and merchants, beating the hired guns with fists and chairs. A new voice cut through the chaos. "United States Marshals, stand down." A tall man in a dusty duster, a federal star gleaming on his chest, stood in the doorway, a heavy pistol in each hand. The noon train had arrived. Merrick Hale's face went white. His civilized mask dissolved. He turned and ran. He ran right into Judge Caldwell, who was holding the heavy shotgun Pike had dropped.
Merrick Hale,
the judge said, "You are under arrest for trafficking in human souls." Pike saw his chance. Hale was finished. The marshal was busy. He shoved his way through the crowd, heading for the back exit. He burst out of the door and ran straight into Nate Benally. Pike had dragged Nate to the courthouse, a beaten, bloody hostage. But in the chaos, the marshal had cut him free. Pike, desperate, swung at Nate. But Nate was holding the heavy steel coupling hook Key had dropped. He did not hesitate. He swung it, a low, vicious arc, striking Pike in his uninjured leg. Pike screamed and went down. Nate raised the hook over his head, ready to bring it down on Pike's skull, a mirror of the violence he had endured. "Nate," Key's voice, sharp and clear. "No, we are not them." Nate froze, his chest heaving, his face a mask of tears and blood. He looked at his brother, standing in the doorway with Eliza. He looked at the monster on the ground. He let the hook fall, clattering on the stones. He was free. The marshal, his pistols holstered, took charge. He cuffed Hale. He cuffed the bleeding Pike. He looked at Key and Eliza, who were still standing, still holding hands. "I got a wire about you two," the marshal said, his voice dry. "Said you were fugitives. The wire does not seem to have the story quite right." Judge Caldwell walked over, his hands trembling. He began to gather the papers, the scorched ledger, Hale's letters, the victim lists. He placed them, carefully, into a federal mail satchel. "Marshal," the judge said, his voice clear and loud for the whole town to hear. "This is sealed evidence. For the federal court." The sharp, cold air of the courthouse lobby was suddenly still, the silence heavier and louder than the gunfire had been. It was a silence filled with the smell of sulfur, plaster dust, and blood. Merrick Hale stood in irons, his perfect suit now rumpled, his face a mask of pale, civilized fury. Pike, his leg broken and his face a ruin, spat blood onto the floor, his eyes promising murder. "Marshal," Judge Caldwell said, his voice shaking but gaining strength with every word. "This is not a matter for a closed room. This is a matter for the public." He turned, facing the crowd that still packed the lobby, their faces a mixture of fear and righteous anger. The baker, whose name was Mary, was still clutching the ledger page with her sister's name. "I am convening an immediate territorial hearing," Caldwell declared, his voice ringing, "on the matter of these warrants and the seizure of these individuals." He pointed to the dying woman Key had freed from the train. She was still holding her child. "Ma'am, will you speak?" The woman was terrified. She looked at Key. He nodded. "Once." She stepped forward, her thin shawl clutched around her. "My name is Hasba," she said, her voice a whisper that carried in the absolute silence. "They took us. They said we owed paper. They locked us in the dark car. For days. They took my sister's girl in Silver Butte. We were going to a place they said we would never come back to." "Lies," Hale spat, rattling his chains. "They are legal contracts, indentures all filed." "You mean forged," Mary, the baker, screamed. She thrust the ledger page at Hale's face. "This is my sister. You said she was in California. You are a monster, a slaver." Judge Caldwell held up a hand. He picked up the heavy, scorched ledger Eliza had rescued from the fire. He opened it to the page of forged contracts. He held it next to the file box Eliza had grabbed from the train wreck. "Merrick Hale," the judge said. "I have 2 sets of books, both bearing the seal of the Silver Butte magistrate, both detailing, in your own hand, the sale and transport of human beings. But this one," he held up the scorched ledger, "this one also details the payments to Pike, the payments to Deputy Clark, the payment for the arson of the Sentinel." He held the two books up. "The seals do not match. This one," he pointed to the ledger, "is a forgery, a crude one." The crowd gasped. The paper was not law. The paper was a crime. "This is an outrage," Hale roared. "You have no jurisdiction. I'm a federal contractor." "You are a trafficker," Caldwell said, his voice cold. He turned to the marshal. "I am signing the order of remand. These men are to be held without bond and transferred to the federal court in Prescott. All associated syndicate holdings, including the depot at Dry Fork, are to be sealed, pending a full investigation. All outstanding labor contracts bearing this fraudulent seal are hereby declared null and void." He signed the paper, not with a flourish, but with a hard, angry stroke. The women in the back, the ones Key had freed, began to weep. Low, quiet sounds of release. The townspeople cheered. The marshal nodded, taking the paper. "My men will take them to the train." It was over. The law, slow and heavy, had finally turned. As the marshal began to move Hale and Pike toward the shattered door, a new sound began. It was a rhythmic, mechanical clack, 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 a sound of pure, industrial malice. "Down!" Key screamed. He had heard that sound once, at a High Plains Army fort. He knew what it was. He shoved Eliza toward the floor, shielding her with his own body. The world erupted. The remaining windows of the courthouse exploded, not from a single shot, but from a torrent of lead. A heavy Gatling gun, mounted on the back of a seemingly abandoned freight wagon across the square, had opened fire. The bullets chewed through the stone facade, ripped the oak benches to splinters, and turned the air into a screaming, lethal storm. A Pinkerton, one Hale had left behind, was at the crank, traversing the gun, pouring fire into the courthouse, trying to kill the witnesses, the judge, the marshal, everyone. People screamed, a sound of pure terror, as they dived for cover. The marshal was hit, a shot grazing his arm, and he fell back, his prisoners scattering. Key saw the gunner swing the heavy barrel toward the holding cells, toward the women and children. He could not let that happen. His shoulder was a fire of agony. He had one good arm. He saw a horse, O'Malley's big draft horse, still hitched to a rail, screaming in terror. Key ran. He did not think. He ran into the open, into the storm of bullets. He untied the reins with his right hand. He hauled himself into the saddle. He had no gun. He had no plan. He only had the horse. He dug his heels in. He charged. He rode the draft horse, a one-armed, bloody rider, directly at the Gatling gun. "Key, no!" Eliza screamed from the floor. The gunner saw him, his face contorted with a grim smile. Turned from the courthouse. He began to swing the heavy gun, the clack, clack, clack quickening, tracking this insane target. Key rode into the bullets. He felt them tear the air. He heard them thud into the horse's heavy chest. The animal screamed, a terrible sound, but its momentum carried it forward. Eliza saw the gunner fixate on Key. She saw the long canvas belt feeding ammunition into the gun. She saw the coupling hook Key had dropped, lying on the dusty floor. She grabbed it. She ran. She did not run to Key. She ran to the wagon, low, from the side, while the gunner was focused on the charging horse. Key's horse went down. 10 feet from the wagon, a fountain of blood. Key fell, rolling, his arm saved from the impact by the horse's body. The gunner laughed, cranking, the bullets chewing the dirt where Key lay. "Hey!" Eliza shrieked. The gunner turned. Eliza was on the wagon. She raised the heavy coupling hook. She did not swing at the man. She swung at the mechanism. She brought the steel hook down, hard, severing the canvas ammunition belt. The gun clacked, clacked, and went silent. The gunner stared at the broken belt, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked at Eliza. He snarled and threw the useless crank handle, pulling a heavy revolver from his belt. He aimed, Not at Eliza, but at Key, who was struggling to rise from behind the dead horse. No, Nate Benally, who had been lying, forgotten, by the courthouse steps, launched himself. He had been beaten, broken, and disarmed, but he was his brother's keeper. He threw his body in front of Key just as the gunner fired. The sound of the shot was flat, small after the roar of the Gatling gun. Nate grunted, a sharp exhalation, and stumbled. He looked down. A dark, spreading stain appeared on his right shoulder. He looked at Key, his eyes wide with a strange, final surprise. Then he collapsed. Before the gunner could fire again, the marshal and O'Malley were on him, dragging him from the wagon, their fists rising and falling. Silence. The second silence of the day. "Nate!" Key's voice was a raw wound. He scrambled, one-armed, to his brother's side. He fell to his knees, pulling Nate's head into his lap. The bullet had gone through, high, near the collarbone. It was a mirror of Key's own wound. Blood pulsed, dark and steady. "It is all right, Key," Nate whispered, his breath catching. "It does not hurt much." "Do not talk," Key said, his voice thick. He pressed his one good hand over the wound, trying to stop the bleeding, the warmth of his brother's life spilling over his fingers. Nate looked up at Key's face, at the split lip, the blood, the agony. He smiled, a weak, small thing. "You look terrible. Key did not laugh. He bent his head, his hair mixing with his brother's. He held his brother's hand, the one that was not wearing the bracelet. He held it tight. "Shinai," Key whispered, using the old word. "My little brother, I have you. You are home. You are still a Benally. You are still part of our family." Nate's eyes, which had been hard and haunted for years, softened. The fear, the debt, the shame, it all washed away. He closed his eyes. "I am home," he whispered. He did not pass out. He just rested. Eliza stood, her whole body shaking, the coupling hook hanging from her hand. She looked at the devastation, the dead horse, the silent, broken gun, the wounded men. She looked at the crowd, peeking out from doorways, their faces pale. She raised her head. "Paper," she said, her voice clear, but trembling. "Paper belongs to men. It can be forged. It can be burned. It can be bought. We have seen what men do with paper." She pointed to the sky, to the clear, cold blue. "But the truth belongs to God. It cannot be burned. It cannot be bought. It cannot be shot." She looked at the townspeople, at Mary, at O'Malley, at the priest. "Today," Eliza said, her voice finding its iron, "we chose the truth. We chose God." She let the steel hook fall from her numb fingers. It clanged on the street. Judge Caldwell, his face grim, stepped out onto the porch. "It is done," he announced. "The syndicate in Riverbend is broken." Later, as a doctor stitched Nate's shoulder inside the courthouse, the work of mending began. The marshal, his arm bandaged, found the turquoise bracelet on the wrist of the unconscious gunner, the same man Key had seen in Silver Butte. The marshal looked at the simple blue stones, then at Key, who was watching, his face like stone. Key said nothing. He just held out his good right hand. The marshal dropped the bracelet into his palm. Key walked over to where Nate sat, pale but awake. He knelt. Without a word, he gently fastened their mother's bracelet around his brother's wrist. The circle was complete. Eliza stood apart, her adrenaline gone, leaving only a deep, bone-weary ache. She watched the two brothers, their heads bent together. She touched her own mouth, her lips still bruised, still tasting the memory of blood and iron. She felt a blush rise, hot and confusing. Key looked up. His eyes found hers across the ruined room. He saw her expression. He saw the confusion, the memory. He walked to her. He stood close, so only she could hear. His shoulder was screaming. His lip was swelling. He did not care. "It saved my life, Eliza," he said, his voice quiet. He gently touched his split lip with his fingertip. It woke me up." Ayla's smile touched his face, a real one, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "You owe me another one, when I am not bleeding." Before she could answer, Hasba, the Dine woman, approached them. She was not empty-handed. She held a thick, folded blanket. It was the one from Shiaj, the one with the lightning pattern. She did not give it to Key. She walked to the center of the lobby, to the main bench, the one that had been scarred and splintered by the Gatling gun. She unfolded the blanket and spread it across the damaged wood. The sharp, bold zigzag of the red and black wool covered the bullet holes. It was a statement. It was Hozo, laid down in the center of the broken, man-made law. The day after the battle at the courthouse was quiet. It was the heavy, breathless quiet that follows a storm, when the air is scoured clean and the world is counting its losses. The dead were few, but the cost was high. The heavy draft horse that Key had ridden lay in the square, a monument to the violence. 2 of Pike's men were dead, men whose names no one knew or asked. The marshal was recovering. Key's shoulder and Nate's were wounds of fire, but the town doctor, a gruff man named Harris, had cleaned and stitched them both, declaring them lucky. That afternoon, Key, his arm in a tight sling, walked out to the horse. O'Malley and his men were preparing to haul the body away. "Wait," Key said. He knelt by the animal's head. He had brought a small pouch from his saddle. He took a pinch of corn pollen and blessed the horse, thanking its spirit for its sacrifice. He lit a bundle of sage, and the sweet, sharp smoke drifted through the bullet-scarred square. He sang a low, quiet song of the blessing way. It was a song for passage, for restoring Hozo to a place that had been violated by iron and rage. Eliza watched from the steps of the courthouse. She stood, silent, her arms wrapped around herself. She, a woman of ink and logic, watched this man perform a ritual of smoke and spirit for a horse he had never met. She had come west to document facts. She was learning, in the heavy silence, to listen to the truth. Inside the courthouse, the work of mending had begun. The building had become a sanctuary, a place of reckoning. Judge Caldwell, his face grim, sat at his desk, the scattered papers now organized. The ledgers, both the scorched one and the captured one, were open. This was Eliza's battlefield. She sat with the judge, cross-referencing the names. The women Key had freed sat on the benches, wrapped in blankets provided by the town. Mary the baker was there, her arm around a thin, dark-haired girl named Lena, her sister, who had been found in the melee, having been brought with Pike's men as a servant. "Hasba," Eliza said, her voice gentle. "The ledger lists your sister, Yazi. Where is she?" Hasba, the Dine woman, looked down. "She was taken, in Silver Butte, at the auction. They sold her paper to a man. Before you." Eliza's face tightened. The Croft girl, the very first injustice. They had saved these 6, but others were already lost. "We will find her," Eliza said, her voice a low promise. "We have the names, we have the destinations." The Paiute children, Sam and his sister, sat apart, watching everything with their wide, old eyes. Father Michael approached them, offering bread. Sam took it, bowed his head, but did not move. He was waiting for Key. Judge Caldwell, seeing the scope of the conspiracy, the depth of the rot, did something Eliza had never seen a man of his station do. He stood up, walked to the center of the room, and faced Hasba and the other Dine women. "As a representative of the laws of this territory," he said, his voice clear, "I apologize. We failed you. The law was used as a weapon against you. That ends." He went to the marshal's office. He tore down the wanted poster that named Eliza and Key. He took a fresh sheet of paper. He wrote, "Reward, $100, paid by the territorial court, for any information leading to the recovery of the persons named on this list, the victims of the Hale Syndicate." He posted the new reward in the center of the square. It was not a hunt, it was a rescue. The work of justice was slow. The work of healing was slower. Nate Benally sat before the judge, his arm in a sling identical to his brother's. Key stood behind him, a silent, one-armed shadow. Mr. Benally," Caldwell said, "your testimony is vital to the federal case against Hale. You were coerced. You were operating under a false debt and a threat to your life. The court recognizes this. However, you were also an agent of the syndicate. You took their pay. You carried their gun." Nate nodded, his face pale. He did not make excuses. "I did. I was lost. I thought I owed them my life. I was wrong. Your actions at the bridge and here at the courthouse have saved lives." Caldwell continued, "The marshal has spoken on your behalf, as has Miss Hart. The court is prepared to offer leniency. All charges against you are suspended." Nate looked at his hands, at the turquoise bracelet. Suspended is not gone. It is not paid. He looked up, his eyes meeting the judge's. "The train, the bridge, I helped break it. I want to help fix it." Caldwell studied him. "The railroad will need a crew to repair that bridge. It is hard, brutal work, and the pay is syndicate pay." "No," Nate said. "The pay goes to the court. To this," he pointed to the new reward poster, "to the families. I want to pay back the real debt. I want to work for the paper." Key watched his brother, and for the first time, he saw the man Nate had become, not the shadow he had been chasing. He saw the strength that had been buried. While the men dealt with the law, Eliza dealt with the word. The Silver Butte Sentinel was gone. She went to the telegraph office in Riverbend. The operator, a nervous young man, looked at her wanted poster, the old one, and then at her. "I need to send a dispatch," Eliza said, placing money on the counter. "To the New York Herald, Boston Globe, and the San Francisco Chronicle." "Ma'am, You will send it," Eliza said, her voice quiet but absolute. "Or you will be charged by Judge Caldwell as an accessory to the syndicate." She sat at the telegraph key. She had no press, she had no paper, but she had the wire. She began to write, not with ink, but with electricity. Her fingers flew. She told the story. "The Canyon Syndicate," by Eliza Hart. She was named Merrick Hale. She was named V. Pike. She named the forged contracts, the ghost depot, the child auctions, the Gatling gun. She listed the names of the missing, sending them across the country on a river of code. She wrote for 5 straight hours, channeling all the fire, all the fury, all the grief into sharp, cold, undeniable prose. She was a reporter again. Key did not stay in the town. He took the freed women and the children to the Arroyo, back to their cold camp. They were safe from the law, but they were not safe from the world. "They will hunt you," he said, his voice low. He spoke to Hasba, but the others listened. "Hale is gone, Pike is gone, but the men who worked for them are still here. The idea is still here." He held up his knife, his good right hand. "I cannot be your shield forever. You must be your own." He spent the next 2 days teaching them. He was one-armed, his left side bound tight, but he was fast. He taught them not how to fight like a man, but how to survive. He taught them how to use a knife, not to attack, but to defend. He taught them how to use a man's own weight against him, how to break a grip, and how to find the soft places. Eliza, having sent her story, rode out to find them. She saw him, his face grim with concentration, sparring with Hasba. He, a warrior, teaching his mother how to kill. It was the hardest, saddest, and most necessary thing she had ever seen. "You are teaching them to be like you," she said, her voice quiet, as he sat by the fire that night. "No," Key said. He was cleaning his rifle, an awkward, one-handed process. "I am teaching them to be free. Freedom must be held. You said that. This is how you hold it." The town of Silver Butte sent a wagon. O'Malley, the saloon keeper, had taken up a collection. He arrived with lumber, glass, and a small, used printing press. "A town needs a voice," he said, unloading it where the sentinel had stood. "And we like yours." 2 days later, Kloop Nate was at the bridge, working with a crew of federal men, his paycheck going directly to Judge Caldwell's victim fund. The town was rebuilding. The dead were buried. Key and Eliza walked, leading their horses, on the high mesa above the town. The wind was gentle, the air clean. His shoulder ached. Her hands were stained with new ink. They walked in silence for a long time. "Back east," Eliza said, her voice soft. "We build walls, thick ones, stone. We build them to feel safe, to keep the world out." Key looked at the horizon, a vast, unbroken line of purple and red. "Here," he said. "The walls are the trap. The Hogan is made of the earth. You are part of it. A home should not keep the world out. It should be open like the sky." "A home without high walls," she whispered, remembering the phrase. They walked, as they moved over the uneven ground, their hands hanging at their sides, touched. His right hand, calloused from the reins, the rifle, the hook, her right hand, the knuckles raw, the fingers stained with the ink of her story. It was not the fire of the kiss in the courthouse. It was not the desperate, bloody oath. It was a simple, quiet connection, a fact. He did not pull away. She did not pull away. His fingers rested against hers, a silent acknowledgement, a resting place. It was not hurried. It was not a demand. It was, Key thought, the beginning of Hozo. That evening, they rode back to his aunt's Hogan. Shayaj was there, carding wool by the fire, as if she had been waiting. The Paiute children, Sam and his sister, were there. Shayaj had found them, and had brought them in. They were sitting by the loom, their faces finally calm. "The children are safe," Shayaj said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. On the loom was a new rug. The old one, the lightning blanket, was in the courthouse, covering the wounds of the law. This new one was different. Eliza stepped closer. The pattern was there, the sharp, strong zigzag of the storm, the red and black of Key's world. But now, woven through it, around it, was a new pattern. A flowing, winding river of deep, clear blue, the color of the sky, the color of ink. "The storm," Shayaj said, her fingers moving. "And the water, 2 paths, they make one blanket." Key looked at Eliza. She was touching the blue thread, her face lit by the fire. He stepped outside, into the cold. Clear night. The wind was rising, shifting. It was the wind of the coming season. Eliza joined him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "They will rebuild the Sentinel," she said. "Nate will rebuild the bridge," he replied. They looked at the stars, thick as spilled salt. "It is not over," she said. "Hale has friends. Pike is still alive. The syndicate is still out there." "I know," Key said. "My paper will be published. They will send me money. They will want me to come east. They will want me to write more." "Will you go?" he asked. The question was simple. The weight of it was immense. Eliza looked at Hogan, at the warm light spilling from the door. She looked at the vast, dark land, a land that had tested her, broken her, and made her real. She turned to him. "When the wind changes, Key," she said, her voice quiet but strong, "we will still be here." The sun was new. It had not yet burned the cold from the high desert air. but it painted the tops of the mesas a bright, clean orange. They stood on a small rise above the Hogan, not far from the arroyo where the healing had begun. There was no church with a steeple. There was no judge with a book. There was only the sky, the red earth, and a wind so quiet it seemed to be listening. Key stood beside Eliza. His left arm was no longer in a sling, but bound tight against his chest, the muscles slowly mending. He wore a clean wool blanket over his shoulders. Eliza wore the dark wool skirt she had mended by hand, the hem still showing the faint, scorched line from the sentinel fire. Shiaj stood before them. She did not hold a Bible. She held 3 strands of sweetgrass, braided together by her strong, knowing hands. She had chanted the dawn songs, blessing the space, making it Hosho. Nate was there, his own arm bound, standing just behind his brother. He looked thin, but his eyes were clear. The turquoise bracelet was bright on his wrist. Hasba, the dying woman, was there, her small child on her hip. The Paiute children, Sam and his sister, sat on a warm rock, watching with a silent, solemn understanding. Father Michael had come, and O'Malley the saloon keeper, and Mary the baker, holding her sister Lena's hand. They were the new family, the community forged in the courthouse fire. Shiaj took Key's good right hand and Eliza's right hand. She did not lay them one on top of the other. She laid them palm to palm, so they could feel life in each other. She began the low, steady chant, the song of walking in beauty. She wrapped the sweetgrass braid around their joined wrists, once, twice, 3 times. Eliza had asked for her own words. She looked at Key, at his dark eyes, at the new, pale scar that marked his lip. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble in the cold. "I came west looking for facts," she said. "I came with ink and paper, and I thought they were the only truth. You taught me about the earth. You taught me about the sky. My walls are gone. This is my home. This is my choice. I choose you." Key looked at her. He saw the woman who had walked into the fire, the woman who had held the coupling hook, the woman who had kissed his bloody mouth and brought him back to life. He did not have her skill with English words. He spoke in Dine, his voice deep and sure. He spoke of the storm finding the water. He spoke of the loom finding the new thread. He spoke of beauty above them, beauty below them, beauty all around them. He spoke of walking in that beauty, with her, until their hair was white as the winter snow. Shiaj tied the knot. It was not iron. It was not paper. It was grass. It was a promise to be held, not a chain to be worn. "Hosho," the old woman said, her voice satisfied. "It is done." The wind, as if it had been holding its breath, stirred. The horses, grazing nearby, raised their heads and huffed, and the children, sensing the tension was finally, truly broken, began to laugh, a high, thin sound that the desert had missed. The world outside the canyon was changing. The telegraph wire, which had once carried Hale's lies, now carried Eliza's truth. 3 days later, the mail wagon brought the newspapers from the east. The Canyon Syndicate, a report from the Arizona Territory, by Eliza Hart. It was the headline in Boston. It was the front page in San Francisco. Her words had become the new paper, the new law. Money began to arrive on the stagecoach, not just pay from her editors, but donations sent to Judge Caldwell's fund, money from churches in Philadelphia, from aid societies in New York, from people who had read the names of the missing and felt the call to act. At the new Sentinel office, a rough, small building, smelling of fresh pine and new ink, Eliza had hammered a list to the wall. It was the long, terrible inventory from Hale's ledgers. When the wire brought news that the Croft girl, Yazi, had been found in a Prescott laundry, bought by a man who feared the article and turned himself in, Eliza picked up her pen. She drew a single, thick black line through the name. Found. When Mary's sister, Lena, was given her new, clean papers from Judge Caldwell, officially declaring her a free citizen. Eliza drew another line. Found. The work was slow. It was not the healing of the blessing way. It was the healing of the pen. It was her own ceremony. The law, slow and heavy, continued to move. Merrick Hale, his face a mask of cold indignation, was taken by the marshal. He was put on the eastbound train, in irons, guarded by 2 federal men. He was bound for a federal trial in Washington, a place where his money and his paper held less power. The syndicate was headless, its power broken in the territory. But Pike was gone. He had vanished from the Riverbend jail 2 nights after the fight, the lock broken. The deputy assigned to watch him found sleeping from a drugged bottle of whiskey. A small, coiled snake was drawn in tobacco juice on the floor of the empty cell. Key knew. Eliza knew. This was a victory. It was not the end of the war. Weeks passed. The first snows touched the high peaks, and the air turned sharp. Key's shoulder was healing. He could move his arm. Slowly, the muscles stiff but strong. Nate, his own wound healing, worked on the Red Finch Bridge. His paychecks going directly to Judge Caldwell's victim fund. He was rebuilding what he had helped to break. Eliza and Key stood by the new corral they had built. The sun was setting, turning the sky the color of a fresh bruise, purple and red. Eliza held up a copy of the new Silver Butte Sentinel, printed on her own press. "My article," she said. The third one was printed in the New York paper. They called it A Testament to Justice. Key looked at her. He was watching her, not the paper. "That is a good story," he said, his voice quiet. He touched the thin, white scar on his upper lip, the small mark that would never fade. "But they missed one part," he said, a faint smile playing on his mouth. "What about the article? Eliza. The one about the kiss that saves a man's life. The one that tastes like blood and gunpowder." Eliza felt a blush rise, hot and surprising. She had not blushed since she was a girl. She stepped closer, resting her hand on his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart. "I do not think I will write that one," she said, her voice low. "That one story is just for us to remember." He smiled, a real smile, and his good arm went around her, pulling her close. He held her as the cold desert night settled around them. Inside the hogan, Shiaj sat at her loom. The thump, thump, thump of the weaving comb was the only sound, the steady heartbeat of the land. On the fence rail, the new rug was finished, hanging in the cold air. The lightning pattern, sharp and dangerous, was still there, a reminder of the storm they had passed through. But now, woven through it, around it, binding it, was a new pattern, a flowing, winding river of deep, clear blue, the color of the sky, the color of water, the color of Eliza's ink. The red dust, the dust of their journey, settled low on the ground. The sound of the loom continued, weaving the future, one thread at a time. Freedom was not a gift that fell from the sky. It was not a word written on paper. It was a choice, held tight, by love, by community, and by a courage that refused to die. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are all listening from, so please drop a comment below, share your thoughts, and let us connect. Remember to subscribe to Wild West Tales, like this video, and give that hype button a push. It helps these stories reach more listeners.